This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the April 18th, 2017 edition of the DRF Players Podcast, show number 230. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal, back with you, coming to you live from the Brooklyn bunker with Muggs, the handicapping Labrador, alongside me for what promises to be a very special edition of the show. We have two guests to introduce first, but before I get to them, I will get to the co-host of the podcast. He's here all the time, no matter where in these great United States he is. He is the people's champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, how are you today?
Man, I'll tell you what, I thought you were gonna cut me a second ago. I heard it in your voice. My mic wasn't working, and I was thankful for once that I was thousands of miles away from your reach.
No, I wasn't upset with you. I knew we just had to get it going. It's complicated. We do the show, for people who are curious about this stuff, we do the show in a variety of different ways. So technology-wise, it's not one size fits all, which is why occasionally we have these little lapses. But I think, we survived hotel Wi-Fi last week, and I think we can survive a JK mic problem this week. I want to welcome back to the show after his heroic emergency appearance last week. He is actually the founding host of the podcast, also the host of the Matt Bernier Show, none other than Matt Bernier. Matt, how are you today?
Morning, gentlemen. Hopefully it's as nice. Well, Pete, I know you and I really geographically aren't that far away from one another. I hope it's as nice where the other two boys are outside. It's gorgeous here in the city.
Excellent. I'll be getting outside. Muggs, the handicapping Labrador. Part of the reason she's sort of semi-stalking me here is she's overdue for a walk, so we'll be getting out and doing that after the show. Also want to welcome back to the show one of the great friends of the podcast. You know him from the great work he does on the Public Handicapper website and his general involvement in the tournament world. He was part of our Triple Crown draft last year under pretty funny circumstances we'll get to in a minute. He is Chris Larmey. Chris, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Pete. Good morning, and hello to Matt and Jonathan as well. I'm pretty excited to be part of the podcast today.
Excellent. Well, last year, actually, let's give a history of the Triple Crown draft. It started off 2 years ago. Matt participated, and Matt and I both went down in that year's competition to podcast host emeritus Mike Hogan. Then last year, we didn't have Matt involved, and actually at first, we didn't have Chris involved either. It was just me, Mike, and JK. And then, apparently unimpressed with our initial selections, Chris Larmey volunteered on Twitter to draft a team from the remaining selections. I don't know if we did maybe 4 each, so we had 12 horses taken, or maybe even as many as 16. And Chris drafted a team from the also-rans, the remainder, that actually finished in what I describe as a 3-way tie for last, which really, I think, in all fairness, means, Chris, you won by being able to pick from the scraps and do as well as Mr. Hogan and I did with normal picks. You were the winner last year. Of course, we had the 3-way tie for last, but we even had one person worse than last year, and that was Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what happened to you in this event last year?
Oh, what happens to me every time I lose? It was somebody else's fault. I was unlucky.
Spoken like a true horse player. Bad ride, trainer, the cheating trainer, with some combination of the above. But we're back this year, and JK, this happened. It seems appropriate given your standing last year, but we recently did a random drawing. My daughter Perrin helped us out in a random drawing. Perrin, big hit down at Oaklawn Park this weekend. What a great time I had, by the way, just for a little aside. Arkansas Derby Day, Oaklawn, a beautiful place, especially when that infield was open. It was like walking back in time. Wonderful experience out there. Want to thank our friends at 10 Strike Racing immensely, especially Clay Sanders and Marshall Graham and all their friends who we got to meet so many different podcast listeners. It was the most podcast listeners I've met at any one location at any one time, even more so than the Paddock Bar at Saratoga. Perrin loved it too. She was raving about the experience, and we thought we'd keep the momentum going by involving her in the draft process today. So it was she who drew the names out of the hat and the first pick is going to go to Jonathan. Matt Bernier, you got the second pick. I got the third pick. Chris, you got the fourth pick. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this as a snake draft. So then we'll go in other words, we just go in reverse order. So Chris will get the fourth and fifth picks, etc. I'll keep a tally here. And we're going to do it. We're going to just keep it very simple. It's going to be for
Pete, before you go, is
Yes.
Jonathan Belichick on the clock yet? Because if he is, I'm looking for a trade between the third and fourth pick. So while you explain the rules, if the third and the fourth pick players are interested in a trade, Jonathan Belichick will trade.
All right. Well, Chris Larmey, we'll start with you. Would you trade your fourth and fifth pick this year for that first pick?
Never, because I know Belichick's always up to something, so I'm not going to go along with it.
No, so that leaves it to you'd potentially trade with me too, JK. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
You would give up the first pick to have then what would it be like the third and the sixth pick? You know what? I'm going to be sporting. I'll go ahead and I'll make that trade with you. So our revised draft order is going to be me, Matt, JK, and Chris, and then we're just going to keep flipping that back and forth, which then means that I'm on the clock for the first pick. Now,
really grinding my gears there. Really grinding my gears.
Is that not acceptable, Matt?
No. It's totally acceptable. It's just the fact that now I don't think I'm going to get the horse that I wanted.
So in other words, you think you know who I'm going to pick, and it wasn't who JK was going to pick.
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't know if I'm going to surprise you or not. I hadn't really thought of this in practical terms. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take my first pick on a horse who, as so many of them do this year, this is a tough game this year because everybody's got some flaw that you can point to. And the flaw for my horse I'm going to pick was the race 2 back. But the last race and the race 3 back, the fact that he's got a Kentucky Derby winning trainer also gives me faith. I'm going to go ahead and pick Irish War Cry to start. Is that where you thought I was going to go?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. So Kinchin's already screwed me over.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. Oh, one more thing about the rules before we really get drafting in earnest here. We'll do 12 points. It's the 3 Triple Crown races, 12 points for a win, 6 points for a place, 3 points for the show. We haven't done anything good in the previous 2 years to honor the winner. We'll try to think of something clever this year to go ahead and make it so that we're actually winning something other than bragging rights. And bragging rights are something. That's not nothing. So we'll keep that as the back burner prize, and hopefully we'll come up with a good front burner prize. All that said, Matt Bernier, now that I've stolen your pick, do you have one at the ready for this first round of the 2017 Triple Crown Draft on the DRF Players podcast?
Out of curiosity, and maybe I just completely blanked and missed this, how many do we get?
Oh, no, we didn't. We did not discuss that. I say we do 5. So we'll 20 horses will go total.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess if that's the case, I was fearful that, Jonathan, I kind of figured I knew who he was going to take, and it would have just fallen into my lap, Irish War Cry. But now we got to kind of adapt on the fly. I talked about it. I know you guys didn't love the horse coming out of the bluegrass, but I just feel like McCracken's going to take a step forward. I don't think we've seen his best just yet. I don't know if he's going to get the pace that he necessarily needs to run at. I know that the Timeform U.S. Pace Predictor that came out yesterday kind of indicates a fast pace, but recently tactical speed has gone a long way. But nonetheless, I'll go with McCracken.
All right, excellent. We got McCracken, pick 2 from Mr. Bernier. We've got peanut gallery comments blowing up my cell phone. I love it. Folks who don't know this, you can listen to the show. Most people listen to the show via iTunes or whichever their main podcast provider is. You can also listen live through Spreaker. We're having a little bit of a technology thing. I want to get back to where I'm tweeting out that link every week. I can't do that right now. Just too many balls in the air. I'll be getting there. But if you go to Spreaker and look for at DRF Formulator Twitter handle, I believe you can find the show to listen in live and attempt to amuse me with your comments as we're going forward. All that being said, JK, you had some sort of scheme that you went ahead and made this trade with me. Who did you have your eye on, or have you been fouled up by Matt grabbing McCracken in the second spot?
Scheme? You mean I traded the first pick and I'm going to get the horse I was going to anyways.
Well, let's hear it.
I couldn't have dreamed it up any better. Always dreaming.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, look, like you said, everything that I got a little bit nervous when you said a trainer that's won the Derby. And then I thought, oh, he's going to take Always Dreaming, but you took Irish War Cry. Well, Todd's won it too, and he's been in it a lot too, so he's learned from his mistakes. I'm excited about this horse moving forward. I like both of the horses that you guys took as well, but I ultimately landed on Always Dreaming.
For me, it was a bit of a photo between those two. I have to admit, now I take your point very much about Pletcher potentially learning from mistakes, shaking up the program, doing things differently. But we are at a point where the overall record in the Derby concerns me. And before you go ahead, Chris Larmey, and give your pick for the fourth pick, final pick of the first round here, just give me your opinion. Was I right? I was on the fence between those two, Irish War Cry and Always Dreaming, and the Pletcher stat. I don't have it in front of me, but it's fairly daunting at this point in the Derby. I let that sway me a little bit. Do you think I was maybe leaning on that a little bit too heavily? What do you think of this of the Pletcher stat in the Derby at this point, and how not beautiful it is?
All right, who are you asking the question of?
I was asking you that, Chris.
Oh, okay. Well, I think there's some validity to it. I think Pletcher's still experimenting with the optimal way to bring his horses to the Derby, but he's pretty sharp. But I think you can't ignore that. I think especially when Always Dreaming comes out of Florida off a big race, that hasn't been the best path for Pletcher bringing a horse, out of a big race from Gulfstream. So yeah, I think there's question marks there. But like you said, even the top few have question marks. And Always Dreaming certainly has talent, so I wouldn't fault that choice.
I was close on those two. Well, now it's your turn. Who are you going to go ahead and pick here in this first round? It seemed from the beginning that you were liking this idea of picking last. You even volunteered to get this position, that it was just truly randomness that you got it. But it seemed like where you wanted to be anyway. So who are the fourth and fifth picks, Chris?
Yeah, my first choice, which I guess is the overall fourth pick, I probably could save this, but I just don't want to lose it. And it's not a joke. I really like Practical Joke in here. I've been high on this horse for 6 months now. This is the first Derby where I really got excited about the play since I'll Have Another. It was another horse I really liked. The last few years I've been kind of ho-hum, but I really like this horse. I like a lot about him. I probably could have waited and got him in the second or third round, but I want to make sure I don't lose that opportunity. So I'm going with Practical Joke.
Let me ask you a Practical Joke question that we talked about a little bit on the show last week. There's a lot of people chattering, and I've been one of them, about just not exactly sure how far this horse wants to go. Do you see anything specific either in his races on the track or in the pedigree that gives you confidence in Practical Joke's ability to get the added distance of the Kentucky Derby?
Well, that certainly has been the storyline that everybody that I listen to has, been towing, and that is he looks like, to quote someone I know on the podcast, a one-turn horse. He's a miler type, if you look at the numbers and you look at his overall progression, he's continued to improve from a figure standpoint as the distances get longer. He just hasn't won. But that isn't because he's failed to get the distance. It's just because he's been outrun or been not, had the optimal setup. I mean, in the Breeders' Cup, he came off a gut-wrenching victory in the Champagne. He had to ship across country, he didn't run his best race, but he got outrun by two horses who ran big. And then in Florida, he came back off the layoff. Chad Brown said to everybody who'd listen, the horse is not nearly cranked up. He made a nice middle move and hung. That's not because he's a miler. It's because he was a short horse. And Gunnevera just really ran a big race. And then even in the Bluegrass, that was a speed favoring track. He was running against the flow. He was wide all the way out. He made a couple of moves in the race. He was the only horse that was making up ground at the end. He didn't get past IRAP, but IRAP ran a big race. He kicked away from a Kraken. He kicked away from J-Boy's Echo. He kicked away from Tafford. To me, this horse hasn't been pushed on. He's been progressing off a nice 2-year-old foundation. Got a great trainer. He hasn't won a Derby, but he hasn't had many horses in it. And this is exactly the kind of horse I want to play. And it certainly is a question mark at 1.25 miles.
I like where you're going with that answer, though. And I also will say this about the horse for sure. Of all the horses in the race, he's one of the ones I'm the most confident will be in the hunt at the pace call. And sometimes when you're handicapping a horse race, that's as good of a place to start as any. All right, let's move on to your second round pick, Chris. Who are you going to back him up with?
All right. The only one left in my top 5 is Classic Empire. So I'm going to go with Classic Empire. Again, he has lots of question marks, but to me, he looks a lot like Street Sense. He ran a really big Breeders' Cup Classic, not as big as Street Sense, but that was probably fast enough to win the Derby. He's had some problems. He's a kind of a weird horse, but he seems to be figuring it out again. He's rounding back into form, kind of like Street Sense did. And, I think he could run back to that race, and if he does, he's dangerous. So, here's a horse that's got some class, has some talent, seems to be headed back in the right direction. So that'll be my next play.
I like it. Let me ask you, JK, a question about Classic Empire before you go ahead with your second round pick. What did you think of that effort on Saturday in the Arkansas Derby that I got to witness firsthand? Were you impressed? Do you believe that the real Classic Empire stood up and he's going to be deserving his place as the favorite in this year's Kentucky Derby, which I imagine he'll be off that?
No, not really. I mean, I think the problem is that in that race I was looking for an alternative and I couldn't find one. I think on the pod I ho-hum gave 2 horses, and then ultimately at the end of the day I ended up betting 3 horses because I couldn't really find a legitimate alternative to Classic Empire. So good for the Cassie team of getting that horse back through the crazy winter that he's had. But I guess deep down inside, I kind of hoped that he would win so that I could bet against him in the Derby, because he was good enough to win that race, but now he's going to go 10 against horses that have not missed training like he has. And so, I think he's probably still the most talented. But I learned a long time ago the most talented horse doesn't always win the first Saturday in May.
All right. Well, let's talk about this in terms of contest play. You've got 2 entries here in the first couple of rounds. You've got your always dreaming pick. Have we already taken one of the horses who'd be your second entry, or did your Belichickian strategy work out perfectly where you get the first 2 horses you'd want here?
It's falling into place magnificently. Magnificently. And I know Matt's not gonna do me wrong because he's married to a horse that I wouldn't take, and then it will fall right back to me making the great selection to round off the second round.
Like Bobby Fischer here, thinking 4 moves ahead. So who do you want?
No, it's Matt next, isn't it?
No, it's your pick, son.
Oh, jeez. Look at that. It's not very Belichick of me, is it?
No, I don't believe he's ever gotten up at the wrong time to go shake hands and talk to Roger Goodell. I think that this is a JK special.
He would never, ever do that. Okay. I am going to go with cloud computing.
Okay, cloud computing. Interesting. I thought I heard you thinking there. So that's interesting that.
I was thinking.
You didn't quite have it figured out. Cloud computing, who is currently where? He is currently ranked 20th. Chad Brown quotes the other day about thinking very seriously. I think his exact words were leaning towards skipping and maybe even thinking about a summer campaign. But the call of Triple Crown often is too much for trainers to say no to. So I definitely get where you're going with that one. We tabbed the source of
Preakness. It's a Preakness play for me.
Right, well, that worked out sort of last year. You had Stradivari in the gate. Maybe it'll be the same type of situation. Matt Bernier, where are you going with your second round pick?
I'm going to give the pick, and Pete, this is your show. I don't want to totally sort of take over what this thing is, but certain reports are suggesting that now Classic Empire is the most talented horse in the Cassie barn, because Tepin may have been retired, but that's another story for another time. I'm going to go with Gunnevera in this spot. I just think he's a horse he's a blue collar horse. He doesn't blow your socks off, but I think he's going to show up with an honest effort.
Was that a little bit of breaking news there? Did somebody on our site report that officially, Matt, or is it just some scuttlebutt you're hearing?
The scuttlebutt. I'm going to leave it at that. But I say reliable. I mean, we're not talking about just Joe Blow throwing something out there. None of our people have put it out there yet, but it looks like Tepin has been retired.
If it's on Norm Cassie's Twitter feed, that's good enough for me. I'm just guessing that might be who would have broken news like that. That's we'll this is the Triple Crown draft edition of the show. We'll certainly spend a lot of time, if that proves to be correct, talking about Tepin probably on Friday. But Gunnevera, certainly one of the logical picks. And that sends it back to me for 2 picks here. And boy, it really starts to get interesting looking over the list. I don't have a specific plan. Let me see what I can conjure quickly in my mind here. How about I go a little bit in left field here and look for something that's never happened before, and that's for a non-North American based horse in Thunder Snow. I'm going to throw Thunder Snow out there just under the idea that the horse, maybe this is the kind of year with all the questions as we've talked about that you want a stranger. And with that in mind, I'm going to throw that out there. And I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to take a horse right back who I picked last weekend in the Arkansas Derby. Wasn't smart enough, even though I talked about how Sonneteer was a great bet for 3rd and 4th and how I liked Conquest Mo Money as a key horse. Wasn't smart enough to hit the $280 for a dime super. Hopefully some listeners out there, some people who read my super look in the Derby countdown guide were smart enough to come up with that. I know I wasn't. I merely got my money back on a lame saver exacta. But I'm going to go ahead with Conquest Mo Money, and under the theory that that when you examine the effort in the context of the Arkansas Derby, where he was vis-a-vis the early pace and how much he still held on to finish, I get the idea that was maybe a short Classic Empire with a trip who still ran him down. But in a race like this, race like the Kentucky Derby, the abundant questions, the price he's going to be, I know that doesn't help us for this game specifically, but I'm going to go ahead and cast in my lot with Conquest Mo Money as the first pick of the 3rd round here, and that would send it back to you, Matt Bernier.
Yeah, now is really when you kind of make or break, isn't it? Where, everyone has those horses that you love at the top. Now it's a matter of you trying to make a case for certain ones. I have to be honest, I'm not thrilled with how he's run as a 3-year-old, but I believe he is one of 2 Grade 1 winners overall in the top 20. I guess at this point, I have no choice. I have to take Gormley right now.
I know you've been a big Gormley fan, and we talked about the Santa Anita Derby when you were on the show the last time, but as you point out, the horse has a resume and is coming off a win and showed you get the impression that the jockey and horse partnership there is potentially only going to get stronger as they get more used to each other, given the question in tactics last time of whether to send or settle and how well settling worked out. I get it at this point in the draft. JK, who do you follow that one up with?
I'm going to follow it up with a trainer who's won this race a few times in the last few years, and I'm going to go with IRAP.
Okay. IRAP, the Bluegrass winner, the most accomplished maiden on the Kentucky Derby trail before that, and stepped up with the big win. Is this for you? Is this in Doug O'Neill we trust play based on the success he's had in the race the last few years, or is there something specific you like about the horse?
No, I think it's more of a Doug thing, and he did beat Matt's first pick, who I was going to pick if he didn't, if Always Dreaming was gone. That's all it is. It's just that, and then we've talked about it before how Doug is known for his his really aggressive gallops, and I think that really sets horses up to run well going 1.25 miles for the first time. And by no means do I think IRAP can win the race, but he is one that I definitely think can be involved. And I also believe that the Redhams and Doug O'Neill are the types of connections that will go on with him. Maybe run him in the Preakness or give him a break and run him in the Belmont. But I'm wanting horses that I can get in more than one Triple Crown race.
I like it. Chris Larmey, you're up with another double shot here.
Yeah, it seems like it's feast or famine for me on the way the snake stuff goes on the order. Yeah, I'm kind of happy. I didn't think this horse would be left this late in the draft, but I'm going to go with a trainer who doesn't usually win the Derby, but he gets horses to clunk up for a piece, and then he usually rests them up and they run well in the Belmont, and that's Dale Romans, and I'll go with J-Boy's Echo as my next play. This is more of a thinking beyond the Derby kind of play, but maybe hoping he picks up a few points underneath in the Derby, but then rests up and runs big in the Belmont, which is sort of how I got my points last year with Creator and Destin.
Right. Very smart. Very smart.
And probably along the same lines, my next one will be a trainer, another trainer who does better in the Belmont than the Derby, and that's Todd Fletcher. And I'll go with the one-eyed horse, Patch, who's really bred for the Belmont, and he's got a lot of upside. I'm a little nervous about him running with one eye in a 20-horse field, but maybe you can get a piece of that one and then again get pointed towards the Belmont. So those are the two I'll go with.
We do see that pattern every year of the Kentucky Derby also ran so often being an overlay in the Belmont. It's something I think it's happened enough. It's something we can really start thinking about in terms of our selections rather than reaching out of the Derby top 20 to think of that horse who you think can run okay in the Derby, but really might shine and get you to the top as Creator and Destin did for you last year in that impressive stretch run for the Belmont Stakes. Jonathan, where are you headed here?
I know that my fifth pick's going to still be there, so I'm not too worried about that one. I'm going to save it. Look, I feel silly not taking the horse that's leading the Derby point system, but I wouldn't take him if you gave me 6 horses in Girvin.
What did Girvin ever do to you is my question.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I'm going to take Taprit. I mean, just call this the Todd Pletcher show. I got 2 Todds.
He'd slip to me in the next round. I made a calculated gamble. He'd still be around, but
it's this newfound love I have for the bluegrass, I guess, that's got me picking all these horses out of the bluegrass. So I'm going to take Taprit. I really can't make an excuse for his performance last time, but his races prior to that I think were pretty impressive, and I know that Chris shares the same sentiment about one of the trips that Taprit had in the past. So I'll give him a shot, right? He'll be in the gate. Todd will be there. What's the problem with him running third or second?
I totally get it. I was really hoping he would last 2 more picks. Matt Bernier, would you have taken Taprit if Jonathan hadn't?
I would not have. No, I was torn between one of 2 horses at this, or I should say one of 3 horses at this point. And maybe I'm reaching a little bit, 1 too early, but maybe this is where Kinchin was going. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just looking and seeing at the horses that have already been picked. In 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 down the list, you've got the horse that won the UAE Derby. Well, the runner-up is coming still for the Belmont. That's the plan anyway. And if he were in the Derby, I think everybody and their brother would be talking about him. Maybe a little early, but I'm going to take Epicharis.
I like it. I do. I have heard that the Belmont is in the cards. That was certainly an impressive stretch duel between those two from what sounded like the buyer would have been not a huge race, right? Something like a 95. Visually, though, it did give the impression of potentially a better race than that. I totally get it. I mean, tough to only have 1 shot, but nice maybe to have a horse that's laid out for that third and final test of the Triple Crown Series. All right, that puts it back to me. I guess if just like trying to follow some logic here, I think I'm going to go with Hentz with the next pick, the Asmussen runner, and I'm going to follow that up. I'm going to take a horse who's not in the 20 currently, and that may make this maybe not the greatest pick, but I like the way this horse is developing somehow, and I'm just going to go with him because I like him as a horse. Sonneteer for my final selection in the Derby draft for 2017. Now that's the first pick of the 5th and final round, and we snake it right back to you, Matt Bernier.
I mean, I guess just by default because I don't love anyone else on here, but I mean the horse with the most points is still on the list. I kind of have to take Girvin at this point, just from a value standpoint.
I get it. I thought about that, and I just decided I wanted Sonneteer on my team. But I mean, you can't fault what the horse has done on the racetrack. The question with Girvin, and the reason Girvin, some people listening to this show, and I think there's a lot of people listening to this show for the first time as we really start to ramp up the Triple Crown coverage are going to think we're completely insane that Gervin lasted this long. Why don't you hypothesize, Chris Larmey, as to why that might be?
I guess that none of us were impressed with the horses that ran down in Louisiana this year. He sort of dominated down there, but we want to see him do it against a little better company. That's probably the downside I would use anyway, and that's why I wasn't too high on him.
And the clock,
winning.
Yeah, the clock in general seems to support that idea that maybe it wasn't the strongest group of horses down there. It may end up making us look silly. I mean, when you just look, if you took the figures out of the form, it may end up making us look silly, and probably, as Matt said, a good value pick, especially this late on. JK, who's your fifth and final?
I was going to do a little wordplay joke here, and then I realized it might come off inappropriate, so I decided to skip it. But I thought I'd at least put it out there if anyone can figure it out. But I'm gonna take Reach the World to not run in the Derby, but to run in one of the other ones. So I just, the horse was I think had like 3 A- workouts in a row. Something was going right. Went the widest in what was a slow Santa Anita Derby. I get that, but Baffert can win the Preakness. He doesn't typically show up for the Belmont, but it feels like this is the type of horse that he's always kind of said will just run all day, and could be a sneaky move for him to show up and snag some points late. And so I went with Reach the World.
I'd guess at your pun, but I may be taken off the air and never allowed back on, so I'm going to leave it alone. Chris Larmey, finish us off here.
All right, my last pick. I've already sort of got the Belmont covered, I think, so I'll go with sort of a Jonathan-type front runner that I thought probably had a more impressive race than people give him credit for, and that was Battalion Runner in the Wood. I think he did all the dirty work, and he finished up pretty well. And we could get a piece of it if depending how the pace sets up in the Derby, and might come back for the Belmont and be a threat on the front end, because the Belmont, often is won by horses near the front, as opposed to what some people think is really a race that would favor deep closers.
That's a great point, and something that a lot of people, newer fans, maybe don't realize. You think, oh, well, the closers have more of a chance to catch up. But the fact of the matter is, when horses are running at that 12 furlongs beyond what many of them want to do naturally, what you'll often see, though not always, is a back down pace that doesn't allow that theoretical stamina to come into play. It seems like the horses that you really want in there are the ones that can kind of grind, can be fast enough to be in some sort of position early and have the stamina to finish through the lane. So I definitely get where you're going with that one for sure. All right, so there you have our top 5 picks. To recap, we'll do a quick recap on this one, and then we'll talk a little bit about last weekend's races, and we'll finish up with an edition of Good Stat, Bad Stat that has some implications for today's show. So for me, it's Irish War Cry, it's Thunder Snow, Conquest Mo Money, Hence, and Sonneteer. That's Team PTF. For Matt, it's McCracken, it's Gunnevara, it's Gormley, it's Epicaris, and it's Gervin. Nice sounding team there. JK ends up with the team of his dreams, starting off with Always Dreaming, Cloud Computing, ERAP, Taprit, and Reach the World. And Chris picking in the final position once again, though a little bit better than last year when he just took the scraps and still basically beat us. This year he's got Practical Joke, Classic Empire, J-Boys Echo, Patch, and Battalion Runner. So we'll follow that along. That'll be something we can we'll be keeping track of here over the next, what is it now? Is it the next 9 weeks before we're through the Triple Crown? Is it that close? I think it's that close, if not closer. It might be 8 weeks. So it'll be playing out very quickly here. Let's talk for another minute. We got into some of these topics as asides as we were doing the draft. Let's talk a little bit more about Classic Empire. This is a race for me where the specifics of the speed figure would totally color my impression. The race came back I believe it was a 94 or 95 on the buyer scale, which does incline me a little bit towards JK's more cynical attitude towards the horse. But when you think about all the difficulty this horse had coming into the race and the idea that he should surely improve off of it between the trip that he had and the sort of journey that he's had throughout the year, shapes like a horse who's got the ability to finish, even if this race were, say, 5 buyer speed figure points higher. And in my quick look at the numbers, I do believe there's a way you could reckon it where it could be up to about 5 points higher. All of a sudden, I'd like him a lot more. Matt Bernier, we'll kick it to you on this horse. How serious of a contender? Obviously, you passed on him in the first round, which tips your hand a little bit. But, I mean, if you're thinking about this horse in terms of value for the Kentucky Derby, what kind of number are you thinking about, and what is your general impression of the horse at this point in time?
It's nice to see him get back to his winning ways. I'll say that. Going into the Arkansas Derby, I thought he was a terrible bet, regardless of the price. I know some people think 9-5 was a gift on what was, I think a lot of people thought was the most talented horse going into the race. I couldn't possibly suggest betting a horse like that when you have no idea what you're going to get out of him. He ran fine. I don't think the trip was nearly as rough or difficult as a lot of people have made it out to be. That's just my opinion. He was in amongst horses, and I know a lot of people said that was a big positive. Certainly is, but if you think that him overcoming that is a good thing, well, guess what? It's only going to get worse 3 weeks from now. You're going to have even, 7 or 8 more horses that you're going to have to deal with. I thought it was fine. I don't have a real knock against it, but I also am not sitting here drooling over it. The only thing that gives me a little bit of cause for pause, the top 4 runners all ran career best, other than Classic Empire, which really he was trying to get back to his best. The top horses all ran their best figs, and maybe it's just this time of year they're all coming together and putting it together. But I kind of feel like the 94 is accurate. He's going to need to do better if he's going to win the Kentucky Derby.
I agree. When you look at the grid of what those horses usually run, the number makes perfect sense. It's looking at some of the other races on the card was making me think, there's a case that could be made that this could maybe be a little bit higher. And it's just that very rare case for me. I'm not usually the type of handicapper who 3 or 4 points of a speed figure is going to dramatically change the way I look at a horse. But for some reason with him, it really is. And I'll definitely be, at the very least, I mean, he's not a horse that I could see really planting my flag with. Obviously, I could have picked him in the draft that I felt that way. And I think there are plenty of people out there, though not us, who would have just taken that opportunity to grab him with that first pick as the likely favorite. But I know he will be on my tickets. I think not dissimilar to how I played the Arkansas Derby, probably a little bit more defense than offense. But I can't leave him out. I can't leave him out entirely. JK, you were stuck into the racing pretty good at Oaklawn on Saturday. Any other thoughts of any coming out of the stake races there, that horses who impressed you or disappointed and are worth discussing for a minute?
Yeah, I thought Midnight Storm was terrible. I mean, considering, I think I even made a joke that I would fight someone if they try to tell me another horse could win that race. So that was shocking. I think what happened there is that we got fooled by that horse that he could run on dirt, and he actually can't. At the highest level, at the high level. I mean, he can run on it. But at a high level, I think that he's going to be better on turf. So I won't fall for that again. But that was pretty disappointing. I didn't see a situation that he would lose.
Yeah, one interesting handicapping angle that we were talking about in the tent was sort of a classic surface thing. The difference between the more stereotypically glib, super fast California surfaces and the tiring surface of Oaklawn. That was the only thing. And I didn't see that before the race. I mean, he was a stone cold single for me. And I just got beat there. But that was the one thing afterwards that made me think like, should I have thought about that? I mean, Matt, you look at stakes races all over the country and obviously are also very specialized in California at times. Is that something you've noticed about these California horses shipping to especially routers shipping from California to the Midwest or the East? Is that something you pay attention to, whether or not they've handled very different types of surfaces in their various starts?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it goes both ways. I think some horses are better suited for California as opposed to others, and vice versa, that are already based there. The argument can certainly be made that a horse like Midnight Storm needs that rock solid sort of, for lack of a better comparison, basically like asphalt. He needs it to be, tighter than tight to get over it and use his speed to his advantage. And conversely, one of my all-time favorites, like Opportunity. I think if he was consistently based on the East Coast, and I've been saying this for 3-4 years now, like I think he would have many more victories to his name, more than he already does. And I hope when it's all said and done for this year, I hope he's on the East Coast. I want him at Saratoga. I want him at Belmont Park. I just think his running style is much better suited for the East Coast than it is the West Coast, and some of his results kind of bear that out.
Absolutely, they do. And Matt, that's not you second guessing. That's something that I heard you say, I think, on this, as far back ago on this show in your first go around as the host, sort of imagining what he would do at a race like the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And it must have been satisfying to get to see that scenario play out in real life. It's one of those subtle factors of handicapping that I think can really provide value, because it's harder for, I think, a computer to really fully understand a subtle difference in a surface that's theoretically the same. Should at least give a little bit of props to the winner of that race, Inside Straight. Want to at least mention his name instead of just talking about Midnight Storm and the disappointing effort there. I did make one bet on Midnight Storm that cashed. I could not resist taking advantage of that on-track situation that they have at Oaklawn, where you get a 10% bonus on track on your show bets. So I did go ahead and make a show bet, which I barely was able to hang on and capitalize. Let's talk about Keeneland for a minute before we loop back to my question. That's gonna wrap everything up. We seem to have lost Jonathan for a second. Hopefully he'll find his way back on the call. So Chris Larmey, I'll ask you this question, and I'm sort of worried that I might get struck by lightning as these words leave my mouth when talking about the Jenny Wiley. It sure looked there for a second in the stretch that Lady Eli had made the winning move. Very impressive late kick from Dickinson to get up and get the victory. Lady Eli, was this just a case of Dickinson having a day when the barn was cycling up and everything was going Dickinson's way? Or at this point in her career I'll say it this way, it sounds a little less offensive than using the dreaded word hung. Is it possible that Lady Eli, as well as she ran and as great as she is, maybe doesn't have that killer instinct at this point in her career?
I wouldn't say that. I just think, she was incredibly talented, precocious 2-year-old. And she went through, that really tough problem with her feet. And I think, she came back and still ran really well, but I just think she hit her ceiling, and she's still going to win races, but there may be other horses that are going to develop and be better than her. And Dickinson might be one of those who, since she moved to the turf, has just turned into a real monster. And I think maybe, Lady Eli just got outrun. It wasn't that she hung or didn't want to win. She just got beat, I think. I think she's a really nice horse, but, she's probably hit her ceiling, and other horses may, surpass her this year.
JK, did you get back on the call there? It looks like you're here again.
Yes, I'm back. So I don't know what happened.
Excellent. That's okay. We were just talking about Lady Eli and the last furlong of the Jenny Wiley. I'll just ask it like this to you, JK. Were you surprised by how that race played out late?
Yeah, I think a little bit. She ranged like she was going to win, and then just kind of didn't pass horses. And unfortunately, someone in a group text or something said, last year she had a little hang in her, which is not a very nice thing to say for a horse that's gone through what she went through. But, compared to how she was running as a 2-year-old and 3-year-old, maybe she just lost a step a little bit. Understandably so. Me, I'll throw the book at someone for hanging, but I don't think she really deserves it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Where do you stand on this issue, Matt Bernier? It sounds like our opinions are sort of all in there are points on a graph that aren't that far from each other, but are all a little bit spread out in different directions. How do you sum up what you saw there?
I have to be honest. I'm in the minority. I think it is incredibly unfair to throw things, even consider the term hung or lost a step. I mean, consider this was her first start of the year. Chad, I know at face value, his numbers are really good off the layoff. When you tighten him up a little bit, this move particularly was not a strong one for him. It was like 1 for 15 with these types. Her best races are at a mile and a quarter. Dickinson is a stone cold mile and the 16th, and she's razor sharp right now. And the fact that Lady Eli lost by a nose or a head, you go back to last year, she made the second last move in that race in her comeback effort, which the last move was the one that ended up winning, and she only lost by, 3/4 of a length to Strike Charmer. And then in the Breeders' Cup, she got run down by a really talented European filly. I just feel like, to me, she has done nothing wrong, and I can only hope people think that she has lost a step or two, because I personally think the complete opposite. I think she's as good as she's ever been. She just, circumstance got her beat this time around, I think. I think she's better with more distance and with a little bit more racing.
I think that's totally fair, and I certainly hope that that's right. It just seems like a question that at least was worth asking. When you see one that good look to put a race to bed and then not quite be able to seal the deal. But for all the reasons you point out, you may see a much improved Lady Eli down the line. And even as much as I talk about the idea that she might have lost a step or whatever, certainly not in any kind of category where I'd be in a hurry to bet against her. I just feel like when she's in a race, you know she's an A, and then you see maybe there's some other A's. That's just how good she's been. And again, what a great story, and great to see her still racing. Has anybody seen what the plan is? What the plan is for the next spot for her?
I have not, but I would hope something along the lines of a summer campaign pointing toward a race like the Beverly D. I think that would be a perfect spot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk briefly about the Lexington. Obviously, nobody was overly impressed with the prospects of any of these horses to make it on the Triple Crown Trail, from the fact that we didn't draft any of them. But there were a couple of impressive performances in there. West Coast, for one, I thought really looked like a horse who should continue to get better. The winner, Senior Investment, also impressive late kick to get the job done. Chris Larmey, back to you. Anybody in that race in particular you're looking to bet next time out?
No, I thought that West Coast, it was a fairly hot pace, and it seemed like the track favored closers on the day. I thought Senior Investment kind of was a suck-up winner in there, so I wasn't as impressed. I think, like you said, West Coast probably was the most impressive horse out of that race, and since it's Bob Baffert trained, we might see that horse in the Preakness of the Derby trial or something somewhere down the road. I think he'll be a pretty good horse, but I don't see him as at the top level, at least right now, of the 3-year-olds.
No, for sure not. But yeah, between being wide, and it seemed like that classic move into a hot pace angle that is in the buyer books. That is one of the things that still, I feel like, provides a reasonable return on investment if you can just follow those horses. That strong middle move to the top, and just getting beaten late by a horse who moves after / gets the better trip in Senior Investment. Did you have any thoughts on the Lexington, JK, that you wanted to share? Or did we lose Jonathan again? It says he's here, but I don't see him, so we'll go ahead and we'll toss that same question to you, Matt Bernier. Anything to take out of that race? Oh, you're back? Well,
sorry.
One
of the least likely winners, I thought, was Senior Investment. I mean, good for him for pulling it off, but I wasn't exactly thrilled with that race. I mean, I'm sure that it'll lead to some Grade 3 wins down the line for some of these horses, but nothing that I want to keep an eye on moving forward.
How about you, Matt? Any thoughts on that race?
Yeah, I think West Coast is a nice horse. I don't know, like Jonathan said, I don't know that he's ever going to be a superstar, but I think there are a couple of spots that he can win some graded stakes. I don't see any reason why not. I believe, and I've only seen the replay once, but I'm pretty sure No Dozing had a pretty miserable trip in there. But at this point, tread lightly with him, just because who knows what No Dozing you're going to get.
Are we sick of his act at this point? I mean, I wrote the super look for that race as well, and my read on the horse was 3-1 or higher, one more chance. Very easy horse to stay away from at 9-5. He did have a very tough. I mean, he had a no hope trip. as I recall. I think there was an incident basically in the first turn that took him out of it. Still managed to get third. So not really a bad effort, but I'm just, the Remsen now, I did the stat for the Super Look. I think after this weekend, it's 18 starts and 1 win, and it's not like there's a whole lot of second and thirds. Do you think, Chris, in your handicapping, is that concept something that's relevant, the negative key race? Is that something that you pay attention to? There's just certain races you don't want horses out of, or is that just circumstantial and maybe no dozing? Finally, next time, ignore it at 6-1 somewhere is a horse we can bet on.
Well, I think it all depends. I mean, certainly that can be a valuable handicapping tool at certain points. At this point now, all these horses have run back 2 or 3 times and you just go off of their form. I think a good example of that, though, the key race is, people are talking about the Sunland Derby as being a key race, and I think some horses that underperformed there have come back and run well, like IRAP and Conquest Mo Money. But I think you have to keep in mind that how that race shaped up, and that was a torrid pace. It looked like just a classic pace meltdown where the winners and the runner-up just kind of clunked up and won. And so I don't think you think, oh, wow, Hentz is a really great bet coming out of that key race because he beat those horses. I think it's sort of the opposite. It shows that, he really benefited from the race flow, and that I'd be kind of reluctant to assume that he could run like that coming back in another race. So I think you have to not just look at how horses come out of that race, but where they were and how the race unfolded, because sometimes that key race is all the horses that were also rans come back and run well, and the winner and the runner-up who benefited from the flow don't run really that well when they come back. So
that's a good point.
Everything's not as simple as it seems, but certainly sometimes, especially with these young horses where you don't have a lot on paper, that key race concept can really help, with a maiden race or a non-winners race. When they all start coming back and running, you can certainly factor that in your handicapping to your, benefit.
Let's talk Sunland Derby for a second. It sounds like the Beyer team have revised the initial figure, which was somewhere on the order of a 94, 95, up to a 98, 99. It's funny, in horse racing Twitter, it's every time a number gets revised, you see people complaining about this. I personally don't get that. If you understand the figure-making process, there's a lot of educated guesses, is maybe one way to put it, that have to be made to make these numbers. They're a blend of art and science. If you want purely mathematical numbers, you can have those, and you can have those, because I'll tell you what, purely mathematical isn't going to do as well as a great figure maker like the ones we have at the Beyer team. And to me, when that number is being revised, it's just helping to more accurately reflect the ability of the horses in that race. I'm fine with it, and I think it's appropriate in the case of the Sunland Derby. Matt Bernier, what are your thoughts on hearing that final figure was raised?
I have no problem with figures being altered afterward. I mean, I think if you don't go back and reassess how things went, then you're kind of doing a disservice to yourself and anyone else that uses your figures. And for the people that kind of just bellyache about, oh, the figure's too high or it's too low or X, Y, and Z, and I mean severely just complain about it. Here I am making a comment about how I think all the horses in a certain race improved, and it makes me question it. That doesn't mean that I'm knocking the fig. I mean, it is what it is, and I'll factor that in. But certain people go above and beyond complaining about figures and how they're 15 points too high. I mean, I really particularly don't care. There are certain exceptions where I know, if there's a race that is going to ultimately be a major factor going forward. I mean, how many people all of a sudden, the 3 additional points that the horses in the Sunland race got, I mean, is that going to completely alter the way you look at that race? Didn't you already kind of look at it a certain way beforehand? I mean, 3 points for me isn't going to be a do or die kind of thing going forward.
No, definitely not a life-changing thing to see that type of upgrade. To me, it's just a helpful way to sort of point to the horse player who isn't necessarily looking at every chart and diving through Formulator the way that we are, to give them a heads up based on complete information. JK, where do you stand on that issue of figures moving around? Is there anything I'd love to have a contrarian opinion of somebody who doesn't think it's appropriate, just so we can have the argument. But where do you stand on that issue of moving figs?
Oh no, you're not going to get a contrarian for me. I've sat and watched Nick Tamero work, and it's a lot, like you said, of educated guesses. Really good educated guesses at that. I mean, it's just the tracks change, and you got to try to make determinations of what it all means. And timers. We learned with Arrogant, timers sometimes can be triggered at the wrong time. So it's a lot of adjustments that need to be made. I'd rather them get it right eventually than just keep lying to themselves and ourselves that the figure was a 96 when they've gotten more information that it should change. In fact, I would be on board that they don't change them enough, that they should adjust them more and more and more and more until they can just kind of keep getting to the most perfect number that they can.
All right, let's do a quick big stat, good stat, bad stat. We're almost out of time. This one comes courtesy of Richard Benware. Since 1993, horses without a stakes win in the Kentucky Derby have 84 starts with 1 win, 6 seconds, and 3/3, $1.22 ROI. Not actually bad for 1 in 84. The last one to do so being Giacomo. Chris Larmey, does that stat impact your thinking on this year's Derby in any way, shape, or form?
There are a lot of bad stats that get thrown around this time of year, is all I can say. That, to me, is completely meaningful.
JK, do you take anything out of that one?
Oh, I think that's a good stat. I mean, I think it illustrates the type of horse that gets themselves into the gate that has not accomplished as much as the other ones. And I think that's a really good one. And, I love knocking some of these ridiculous, 7 weeks ago on a Wednesday, Brad Cox hasn't won on the turf with a horse name that starts with the letter A. Hashtag DRF formulator. I don't buy that.
Well,
getting a little personal there.
I don't disagree with what Jonathan said, but what I meant was it doesn't tell you something. A meaningful stat gives you information you don't have otherwise. Of course, horses that haven't won stakes race in the Derby aren't going to have a good record. It doesn't really tell me anything I wouldn't expect. Now, so that's what I meant in terms of, it just really doesn't tell me anything I wouldn't already know.
Interesting. I love the name, good stat, bad stat, but it's like too simple because you could be, there's different ways of reading and interpreting it. Matt Bernier, just curious if that stat surprises you. Let's get that way. Does that stat surprise you at all? I'll admit it sounded lower than I would have guessed.
No, not one bit. When we're talking about, you have so many stakes prep races leading into the Kentucky Derby, the fact that you don't have any stakes victories going into it, I mean, isn't that everything you need to know about the horse? You didn't win any of the races going in. You had about 5 million of them to try to win. You didn't win any of them. To me, I'm not stunned at all. I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right, no, I'd have to do a little bit of more quick math than I want to do about which year's Kentucky Derby, which horses we just drafted that stat affects negatively. But we can leave that to the eye of the beholder. I'll go ahead and I'll tweet our teams out so folks can follow along with that. It'll give us a fun discussion point. I don't know, Matt Bernier, if you're ever hard up for 30 seconds on your show in the coming weeks, if it's something you want to harken back to. It should be fun to follow along this Triple Crown trail, and hopefully we'll have a better result last year than the 3-way tie for last with one guy even farther back than that. I'm feeling fairly confident we can improve on that performance, if nothing else. Just time for a quick final thought, if any of you gentlemen have one, before we send things away. Mine is, I'm really psyched. Got to be in Oaklawn last weekend. I get to be in Keeneland next weekend. Going to be there for the contest, 2 days of contest, not only the Grade 1 Gamble on Sunday, but also this new $500 live bank contest on Saturday. Going to be great to get to see so many podcast listeners and so many friends out there. Matt Bernier, a closing thought for this Tuesday.
Just that this is the home stretch. Now all the dirty work is done as far as the racing is concerned. You have a pretty good idea who's going to be running in the Kentucky Derby. I would say it's never too early to start doing your work for a 20-horse field where they're never going to run against 20 horses ever again. But I would just say never too early to get a jump start on your work.
I like it. JK.
Same sentiment. I'm excited about Keeneland this weekend. I don't know if Pete teased it or not, but we are 90% very likely to do the podcast from Ashford Stud from Coolmore on Friday. So we should be graced with some people that can answer some questions. If you have some breeding questions that you want to ask or just some curiosities, it'd be a good time to send them in that week, and we can try to get those questions answered.
That's a great idea. Chris Larmey, a final thought.
Well, I'll be joining you guys in Keeneland. I'm looking forward to that. I always love going to Keeneland. It's one of the great places to go to the races. If people haven't ever been there, I recommend you go. It's sort of like Saratoga. It's really a racing community where the entire community is involved. It's a little bit different than any other place, and I think it's a great place to spend a spring weekend. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's an industry town, and that industry is horse racing. They even take it. And I'm the biggest Saratoga guy there is, but I feel like it just racing matters just even more than anywhere in this country, certainly in beautiful Lexington, Kentucky. Can't wait to get down there Thursday night. All right, that's it. That's all the time we have. I want to really thank Matt Bernier 2 weeks in a row coming on and helping us out. Fantastic stuff. Chris Larmey, great job. Glad you were able to make the show proper this year. JK, as always, fantastic work. Really good job. I know you were having some tech issues. You fought through and made excellent contributions to the show. Anyway, most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. Keep those questions and comments coming. You can find me on Twitter @LoomsBoldly. You can hit us up, podcast@drf.com. I especially like that idea. If you have any questions for the Coolmore USA team, a.k.a. Ashford Stud, we will hopefully be there and back on Friday. Until then, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.